9. Ignition sequence start. 6.
Hello, and welcome to this very special episode of Rocket Fuel. Today we're going to be talking about the new tokenomics proposals, and we're going to do a Q&A session with Val and Samus, and this is just going to help people understand what the different changes are that might be coming and answer some of the burning questions that have been asked in the community and in other communities too. So we've got Val here and Samus. Val, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you've been involved with in terms of these tokenomics changes?
Sure. So you know me, whatever. Relatively new in the crypto space, sometime early 2022. I've been extremely active in Rocket Pool as IMC treasurer, RPIP editor, a ton of governance stuff, and I'm sure you've seen me post a lot in trading. For the new tokenomics, I was involved pretty darn early. I had a couple of initial posts in, I think, November, kind of being like, hey, here's some rough ideas about what could be useful. We did the incubator thing. I had some submissions there. That was maybe in February. Then in East Denver, Samus and I did a presentation on a more put together strategy direction. And since then, that's gotten refined to the set of RPIPs that we have today.
Great, thanks, Val. And Samus, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you've been involved in this process?
Absolutely. So I joined Rocket Pool in 2022, but I wasn't necessarily sure how to contribute and kind of was a lurker for a while. But there was the Rapid Research Incubator, which was this past December, basically. After WAC, I think a little bit before that, I was a Rocket Fuel watcher and I saw updates about Lido CSM was going live and a little bit of like panic, freak out. Okay, what are we going to do? And so it sparked an opportunity to actually try to contribute. And so I threw some ideas out there and started to engage more. And I found the Discord actually provides a really cool avenue for that. There's a lot of ways you can just throw ideas out and contribute. So that started in January, and Eth Denver in February, we got to present on some of those ideas that we'd put together, and Valdorf and I's ideas kind of merged, and we wanted to put one proposal forward. So that was the main thing I've really been contributing to. I recently joined the IMC, so I'm kind of still getting my feet wet on all of that, understanding how that works, but it's been fun to just get more involved and looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, I think the way that both of you started contributing to Rocket Pool was like really a lot really quickly, and I think that's a really great like model for other people who want to start contributing to the community as well. Let's get down to the meat of the topics, right? So the first question, of course, there's a couple of questions is why do we have these new tokenomics? What's the problem with the current tokenomics? And do we even need new tokenomics? Can't the current system that we have be fixed somehow? So Val, do you want to get us started on that?
Sure, yeah. The existing tokenomics have some pretty core issues, so it's not something that we can just tweak away around the edges. So we're going to try to do our best in this call, but I really encourage people to check out rpl.rehab. We've written up some explainers. It's like a 5-part thing. In the first part, we actually address this very directly. It's about why we need new tokenomics. There's 5 issues we highlight. One is that running mini pools is primarily speculative. Another is that there isn't enough incentive to keep your RPL topped off above the minimum all times. Another one is that all the models that we've really had about RPL value assume that people will be at the minimum or better, and that's just not been the case. So the models kind of fall apart, and RPL should have a fair value that's under that. And then, to me, the 2 worst issues, rETH growth, rETH growth is bottlenecked by NO supply. Right, we have node. If we don't have node operators, we can't make new rETH. It's that simple. So if at any point RPL makes being a node operator unattractive, which is the case that we've been in for a while now, then we just can't mint more rETH. The system cannot grow. And it's kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, really. Finally, our system's brutal. It's opinionated about the value of RPL, and it tries to force its opinion onto the market, right? When we say you require 10% of borrowed ETH per validator, if you model it out, there's an implied value that there's an implied amount of ETH that you'd have to get per RPL for that to be worth it. And if the market doesn't think that's worth it, you simply don't get new node operators. So that's I think the explanation of what we've seen. And there's no quick parameter to tune that will fix it. We just don't have something like that. And so the new tokenomics kind of have that as a focus, some way to fix issues, to listen to the market better. Yeah, and so I think, in short, the new tokenomics are just needed to allow the protocol to grow in a healthy way. And I don't think the current tokenomics can be easily adapted to achieve that.
Yeah, thanks, Val. So, Samus, I'm going to ask you this. One of the ways that the new tokenomics is going to work is it's going to allow ETH-only validators. So why do you think that that's the place to start with the new tokenomics?
Right. So as Valdorf was talking, he mentioned we impose a specific value of the protocol says, hey, right now, 10 to 15%, that's where you get max rewards. So you see some people join or they don't. Or right now, before Houston, there was kind of a way to join where if you could find a marriage with another person who had the RPL and you had the ETH, maybe y'all could come together. But we see these are relatively difficult to come by. And there's a little bit of a centralization vector there where it's easier they're called whale marriages pretty often, where you have, for efficiency's sake, it's really easy to get somebody with a lot of RPL and a lot of ETH versus trying to arrange a bunch of small marriages. And you see that even there's hints that, hey, the team might be lending out RPL to institutions or different people who might want to partner with them. But when we talk about decentralization, that isn't necessarily as accessible for small node operators. So say I'm somebody who anonymously joins, and this is kind of the backbone of both Ethereum and of Rocket Pool, is a anonymous node operator can join the system, they bring the capital requirement, and they can start contributing. And as soon as you put barriers in front of that, or friction, it can destroy value more than it creates value. So I think a specific example can be, especially once you have more competition, you recognize Rocket Pool doesn't have a monopoly on this market. And so we can try to add barriers in front of people to say, hey, here's this additional entry ticket you have to buy or find a partner to speculate on RPL with you. Or you can just go to somebody next door who doesn't have that requirement and they offer you better yield. And as a node operator, eventually the rational thing to do might be that instead of contributing to Rocket Pool. So what instead we want to do is provide a place for them to participate, but instead make sure that if they're not going to bring their own RPL, they at least give value back to RPL. So they join and part of their revenue gets directed to RPL holders and stakers specifically. And that helps protect governance and it helps align incentives all around for a balancing market where people can freely speculate how much RPL do they want to bring, and we're not telling them as a requirement you must bring this amount or find somebody else who can partner with you to bring that amount.
And how's this going to work with regards to something like Lido CSM and what they're doing over there? Was that a motivation at all for choosing ETH-only validators?
Right. So that was even like I mentioned at the beginning of this recording, your initial recognition of, hey, Lido CSM is probably going to go live end of 2024, and it's going to be permissionless, and it's going to allow ETH-only bonds. And as an example, they would have the same or better bonding curves. They could also do 4 ETH and then 1.5 ETH. So they've mentioned, as soon as we described bond curves, they also came out not long after and said, oh yeah, I think we'll do bond curves. But they specifically don't have a LDO token bonding requirement. So for them, they don't have that friction that's there. And so as a node operator, if you're comparing products, And you say, okay, I go over here and I'm forced to speculate on RPL, which dominates my return on investment, or I have to find a way to get somebody to delegate to me, which maybe I'm only bringing 4 ETH and I've never been a node operator before. And how am I going to get somebody to delegate to me? And so I'm just going to go to Lido. And then you lose that participation and that value that they could have brought instead to Rocket Pool, which could have brought growth and contributed to Rocket Pool's success.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Samus. Val, can you tell me how the revenue is going to work in the new system and what's going to happen with that revenue?
Yeah. So there's a few different parties in the system overall, and we're going to have the same parties now and later. We have rETH holders, node operators. We have RPL holders. We have voters. And then if you expand a little bit to include all of our expenses, we also have the dev team, the ODAO, grant expenses, liquidity expenses, and we have a little bit that we hold in reserve treasury for miscellany. So UARS, which is universally adjustable revenue, is that it? Great. Revenue shares. It has explicit shares for node operators, for rETH, for vote eligible RPL, and for all RPL. So that includes unstaked RPL as well. Even the remaining expenses, the dev team, ODAO, etc. Stuff will be paid for by RPL inflation, which is the same as current.
Excellent. Yeah, and then why not? So you're telling me about all these different places where the protocol income, the rETH commission is going to be divided out amongst. Why isn't it just all going to node operators like it does now?
It doesn't. Right now it does not all go to node operators. We like to pretend it does, but it just doesn't. The requirement to stake RPL functions very similarly to a protocol fee being paid to RPL holders. Honestly, I see many more similarities to the current setup than differences, and I see what we're doing here as a significant simplification. That what the main benefits we get is that we stop having things be forcefully enmeshed the way they are right now. I would say that currently NOs do not get all the rETH rewards. They still, we have one source of revenue in the system, which is rETH commission, and it has to fund everything. That means it funds RPL. That means it funds everything that's being paid for via RPL inflation as well. So, yeah, I mostly don't think that's the case right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Samus, I'm going to come back to you because you just corrected Val on the UARS, the synonym. So can you tell us what UARS is and how it will work? And will this be something that's automated or managed by a committee? Like, what's it going to look like?
Right. So I think a helpful starting place is what does it look like right now? So it's a little bit more of a fixed commission and an individual validator basis. So you have a contract. When you start it, you say, this is going to be the commission, and it will be 14% for my validator for the lifetime of that validator. And at times, Rocket Pool had tried a dynamic commission where if there was a higher demand, then we could have a higher commission, but it would still be fixed for that validator. So you have people that were just waiting for demand to be higher, and then they would spin up at a higher percentage, like 20% commission. And then so it kind of forces these dynamics, and then they get to stay locked into that 20%. But what a universal adjustable split would be is all mega pools can have the same parameter that we can change protocol wide at the same time. And so it's adjustable and it's not set to one fixed commission. So there's even example of like tragedy of the commons where you have something that would be beneficial if everybody did it, but as an individual, your incentives might not be to do it. So say the protocol is going to not be able to grow unless we lower the commission slightly, but I'm not going to be the one who opts into that lower commission. But once everybody's opted in together, then it's best for everybody. So that's a specific example, but it's universal, adjustable, and then it's revenue splits. So we have, like Val said, there's one revenue for the protocol, which is the fee we charge our ETH holders, and that gets split out to a few places. That would be the node operators, and that only depends on your ETH that you bring. and then it gets split out to voters who are staking RPL on a node, and then potentially a surplus share would be a third share that could go to something like a buy and burn mechanism or a buy and liquidity provides LP. But ultimately, all three of these can be adjusted, and the total would be the same 14%, for example. Or we can change the total fee to be lower or higher. But at the end of the day, everything's going to be controlled by the DAO. So the DAO can vote to change any of the parameter values. But in terms of what is most critical for Rocket Pool is keeping up with the market. So say there's something that says, hey, we're way undershooting the market and all our node operators are leaving. We need to be able to quickly incentivize making sure that they can stay. So there's some specs that we haven't finalized necessarily in terms of voting on them, but a option would be considering setting that node operator share a little bit lower and then giving some ability for a committee like a security council to be able to go in and quickly adjust and increment it upward to maintain a competitive market value. And they would break through some seals. So you say you can do that 6 times or something, and they would increase it like 0.5%. And they could do that up to 6 times without requiring a vote from the DAO. But they can't rug node operators by lowering it. And ultimately the DAO would have to vote to give them more seals. But it's TBD. We may decide that's, for complexity's sake, let's just have the DAO votes on it. But we have to recognize that's going to be a slower process. So we're going to have to try to pick the best values we can. And the market may tell us otherwise, but we can listen to it and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, so that you'll just get this element of flexibility then, and it'll be universal. Like every node operator will like adhere to those parameters,
Right.
basically. Yeah, excellent. Okay, Val, I'm going to come back to you now. Can you tell me why the changes are going to happen across multiple updates instead of just happening all at once? Like, is it going to be 1 update, 2 updates, 3 updates? Like, what's going on there?
None of this is final. Depends also on execution. The game plan is to do 2. The biggest reason is that forced exits require Petra, which would be mean waiting significantly. I think they're now saying it's the first quarter of 2025. That's completely liable to slip. If you told me it didn't come out until even the third quarter of 2025, I'd kind of shrug and be like, yeah, that's not shocking. So it would be really problematic, I think, for Rocket Pool to not have anything for that long, to not be able to have anything for that long. So the idea is we can have Saturn 1, get most of the bones there, get some growth from Eth-only, get some growth from reducing the ETH bond partway. We are planning on reducing it to 4 ETH at that point. One important aspect of that is so 4 ETH is kind of on the edge for my comfort level if you told me there were no forced exits. But this isn't no forced exits. This is like no immediate forced exits, but they are coming. And that does change the math on how much someone could steal. 4 ETH is comfortable for me there. What isn't comfortable without forced exits is 1.5 ETH bond validators. So that would need Saturn 2, which is why it would be split up. There's a couple of other small features around force exiting if the validator balance is leaking, or an automatic voter share adjustment. And I think the team has kind of expressed some, oh god, this is a lot of scope concerns. So we might see if we can shift some other things from Saturn 1 to 2. But in general, we'd like to get the bones in on Saturn 1. We'd like to get our short-term stuff resolved in Saturn 1. And then we'd like to have Saturn 2 be the one that can really, truly compete with CSM. And, ever after with
That's
the market.
great. Yeah. So one of the things I just want to clarify is about you saying, why you were comfortable with the 4 ETH validators now, in Saturn 1 with the idea that forced exits was going to come. Is that just because there wouldn't be enough time for someone to steal enough to make it worthwhile, or is there some other reason there?
Yeah, so essentially the math on MEV theft is essentially, if you're a good thief, you don't start stealing right away. You wait until you have a juicy block. You steal the juicy block, and then once you've already stolen the juicy block, you're an outlaw. So you might as well steal everything after that. So you know, if you do the math out, there's that first chunk, and then there's the ever after. And if you have forced exits, the ever after is near zero. And if you have forced exits coming in 6 months, the ever after is not too big.
Yeah.
Yep, that's the idea.
And it's not just that the ever after is not too big, it's that, with the number of validators right now on the Beacon chain, the fact that a 4 ETH validator will get a block like every 3 months or so on average, right? Like maybe even more than that now. So even that first juicy block might never come basically until we get forced exits. Is that right?
That's extremely likely. I mean, juicy blocks are extraordinarily rare.
Yeah.
They're called lottery blocks for a reason.
Yeah. Okay, Val, we're going to change the topic now, but I'm going to stick with you. So I'm going to ask you this question first. So now we're moving on to questions directly related to rETH more than anything else. So the question is, we'll make these changes to have LEB4s, like 4 ETH validators. So each validator will be able to have 28 ETH worth of rETH that it can mint, and that will be 7 times more efficient than the original 16 ETH validators we had, right? So the question then comes like, won't rETH minting become the bottleneck? And where is the demand for this rETH going to come from? I think you actually shared a stat on trading once that said if every node operator in Rocket Pool becomes a 4 ETH node operator, we'd have like 1 million rETH worth of space or something like that develop overnight. Yeah. How would that work?
I don't remember the exact number, but yeah, it's a big number. It is. So a couple things I'll mention. One, it's unlikely that everyone does switch. I think we've had I think we're a little over half have switched to LEB8s from 16 ETH minute pools. So the idea of 100% swapping over, especially fast, very unlikely. But back to the original question, I really hope that rETH is the bottleneck. I think that's the goal, right? Like we don't want 2 bottlenecks, because that's extremely difficult as someone planning. It's very difficult to solve 2 disparate problems at the same time and balance them all the time. So we don't want that. So I hope we can get just node operators paid enough that we have a nice, strong supply, and we don't have to worry about it. The other thing there is, I have no idea where that bottleneck is. I do assume that there is a limit where that we don't just get more people buying rETH and minting it all the time. I'm not sure where that is. Once we do hit it, I think we'll have to address it, and that'll be good. We have a rough tool with UARS where we can just say, hey, we'll just give a bigger share to rETH, and I think we can also do more fine-tuned things where marketing matters. We haven't really done any. Partnerships can matter. I think there's incentives that can matter. So rather one thing that the IMC is explicitly stopped from doing is providing incentives that purely create demand and don't create liquidity. So we haven't spent any money on incentivizing the use of rETH in a lending market or anything like that,
or referral programs or anything like that.
Right. Yep. So yeah. we could do any of these things, and I think those might be more efficient at generating demand than just saying, hey, let's just increase the rETH share. But yeah, I think we have a fair number of tools, and we would get to try them and see what works, and actually work on just that problem without worrying about the NO side at the same time. So I that's a good problem to have.
Yeah, I like that idea of it just being one bottleneck instead of multiple potential bottlenecks like we have now. So yeah, that's really cool. Samus, I'm going to come back to you, and it's kind of like an extension of this question. Will the 14% commission be attractive enough to get more people to mint rETH? because it's higher than Lido right now. The Lido charge a 10% commission for the ST ETH, but it's way better than something like Coinbase, who charge 25% commission. How do you think that will fit for users? Do you think we'll have to change that?
I think at first we want to keep it the same, and we already see there's high demand, at least for what we have in the deposit pool. It's been full for the better part of a year now, really since Atlas. There was a node operator queue as everybody kind of migrated, and then since then, the node operator supply has been the bottleneck, and we see demand has been full. But once we open the floodgates, hopefully with allowing node operators to really create that supply, I think that question came up at ETH Denver, and I remember the team responded and just chimed in that even though we don't know exactly how much latent demand there is and we can't predict it fully, we do know it's there, and there's a substantial amount of it. They had mentioned even examples like MetaMask. Right now, you can't mint rETH through their wallet, so it looks like a less ideal option even for the user when they're trying to decide. And so it's really instead they just swap on the secondary market, and maybe a lot of times there's consistently a premium. And so when you're trying to compare options, it doesn't look as attractive. But overall, I think rETH has a lot of intangibles, and it has a lot of, maybe not intangibles, but when you account for the risk-adjusted return, it really shines. Just the node operator set being as diverse as it is, and that really helps it to be more robust against any kind of attack or any kind of things that would make other protocols be a higher risk, and whether it's centralization risks or governance or even I think the amount of yield that's sorry, I'm forgetting what it's called. Lending markets. I think I'd heard like Lido's staked ETH has a lot of leverage that's been stacked up, and so there's potentials for those things to unwind, whereas our ETH, we haven't been marketing it and we haven't been trying to grow that demand, but over time we can kind of see where things are, and it's always adjustable.
One little adder there. We talk about having 14% commission. When we're writing a full deposit pool, it's significantly higher. I don't know, just maybe 18, 17%, something like that, in reality, because we have idle ETH, and idle ETH doesn't make money. So as even interestingly, there's this thing where if we get rid of the supply bottleneck, instantly our ETH gains will improve. So that's kind of cool.
We're going to talk about that a little bit later as well with the Q dynamics. There's some interesting questions coming up with how that might make our ETH more attractive as well. Let's talk about how we're going to punish, or like, wait, actually, no. Let's talk about collateral, right? So the ETH that a node operator provides is their collateral against slashing, leakage, all that kind of stuff. Reducing the collateral amount from 16 ETH down to 8 ETH, and now in Saturn 1 down to 4 ETH, and then Saturn 2 down to 1.5 ETH. Will our ETH still be secured against like slashing offenses and leakage and all that kind of stuff? Like, how are we going to make sure that our ETH, maintains as much value and rewards as possible in the face of those kind of like negative actions?
Yep. So there's kind of two sides to that, and it's really what's defined the bond curve. One side is this kind of malicious MEV theft, which is how much can I take out of the system immediately, and that's kind of been what sets our initial few validators. So those two, we start with 2 4 ETH validators to kind of get enough skin in the game to make it so that most validators, most node operators don't have opportunities to steal profitably. So that's the driving force behind those two. And then the next part, which is 1.5 for any number of validators, is more meant to address things like abandonment, where you will slowly lose some ETH over time. And at that point, we can force exit. Remember, for Saturn 2, we plan to have force exiting, so we can literally just look at the balance and force exit the relevant validators, so our ETH would not suffer any loss in that scenario. Similarly, when you have slashing, the minimum penalty is 1 ETH, and in fact, that's the only penalty that has been seen on chain to date. A large correlated slashing could easily be over 1.5 ETH. If you have one of the large clients cause an issue, you will see massive correlated. You may see massive correlated slashings, and in that sort of scenario, it could be over 1.5 ETH. What we should keep in mind there is, compared to a centralized service like Lido, where they have 0 ETH of bond, 1.5 ETH is still significantly more than 0 per validator. So, so if say there was a correlated slashing for 3 ETH, the loss suffered by rETH holders compared to stETH holders would be half of that. These are pretty bad black swanish scenarios to get that bad, but even in those scenarios, we're not perfect, but we do have an advantage, and I think that's still important.
Yeah, and like you said, for it to be a large correlated slashing activity, there would have to be something really wrong with Ethereum as a whole, in which case we'd have some other really big problems as well. So that 1.5 ETH should cover most instances, right?
I think it needs to be over 1% of all validators simultaneously.
Yeah.
But hopefully,
really bad.
Rocket Pool has great client diversity, and so not all of our validators would get slashed, like potentially a centralized actor with the same client. But yeah,
that makes sense. Samus, I'm going to come back to you now, and we're actually going to start a new topic of questions. So we're going to be talking about questions from the perspective of node operators now. And the first question is, how will the money that goes to node operators be decided? Like, what will the percentage rewards be, and what kind of APR will this result in for node operators?
Right. When we look at setting this specific variable, it's the beauty of having this universal adjustable split is you can just say, let's adjust things one at a time. So we say, how much demand is there for node operators? What do they demand from Rocket Pool? So we can provide a competitive commission, and then we can look at, okay, what's competitive for governance and all that. But starting with just commission for node operators, and with 3.5% was kind of an initial value, and we recognize we're going to start that initially a little bit low. And that was for what we talked about earlier of you could rapidly increase that as needed, but we can't decrease it as easily. So recognizing somewhere like Lido CSM, they've put forward their number was 7.5%, but also they don't have any revenue going to LDO. And so there's nothing that they're sharing it with. They have some, I think 2.5% goes to Treasury. But if you look at all of our existing node operators, they're bringing ETH and RPL. And so when you bring both of those two things under the new model, you're getting 3.5% plus, say, 5.5% from the voter share. So it ends up being 9%, for example. But ultimately, we have the ability to increase that. So you could be somebody who joins, you want to do Eth-only. So taking out the RPL side of it, if we decide, we set 3.5% and not enough node operators are joining, we're really struggling with supply, and we start increasing it. Some other example numbers, especially once you get to Saturn 2 and you have 1.5 ETH bonds, I'll just list some of those. This is on that same rpl.rehab website where it has the explainers. There's a chart that shows for each bond size relative to node operator commission, what is your earnings relative to solo staking. So as an example, 3.5% commission was like 1.7 times solo staking. But say we end up increasing it to 5%, you might be closer to 2x solo staking, all the way up to 7%, which might be more competitive, like neck and neck with Lido and Eth-only. That would be close to 2.5x solo staking. So whatever the solo staking APY is, you can recognize it's probably going to be close-ish to 2 times that if you come and join Rocket Pool, whether that's through a combination of RPL and ETH or even just ETH-only.
Nice. Okay. And then can I ask, why aren't we just giving all that 14% to node operators? Why aren't we doing that? Wouldn't that be super attractive for node operators?
Right. I think it would be really attractive for node operators, and we'd probably have way too many in the supply side, and we'd be struggling with demand. So there's one, just generally, do we need to overpay that? Especially when you look at competitors, what are they paying? But when we look at why RPL specifically, and people ask from day one, why have we used RPL? And I think the two most important things that stand out to me, one is governance is what really sets Rocket Pool apart. So because we bond ETH and RPL on the validator, and there's quadratic voting where your votes are worth more initially than just adding a bunch of RPL on the same node, that gives Rocket Pool a really robust governance structure where it's really hard to attack it. And so as we become more decentralized, this is something Lido will have to deal with. You're giving more power to the governance. So you're taking it away from a centralized system and giving it to the DAO generally. And if you look at how do you swing a vote in Rocket Pool, it takes a lot. I mean, that's part of why we're going through all this, like building consensus and steelman arguments with different perspectives, as we really want to make sure the whole community is on board with it, versus maybe in a different system, say Lido's the top 5 voters just swing it completely, or token holders, if it's just, I just bring my token, and that's susceptible to, okay, I can just borrow a bunch of that token on the market and then vote. But with Rocket Pool, it's really hard to attack that because you have to start up validators and then bond it together. So I think governance is really huge. And then I think funding was the other critical component, that it's hard to fund things without a token. So if the token, you can sell it early on and people are basically investing in your future, and that helps fund protocol, and it provides, that flywheel to just get started. But eventually we could consider giving more revenue directly towards funding from after we've grown and we're bringing in enough revenue as a protocol. Maybe we can offset some of that RPL inflation and do ETH revenue, but funding, governance, and then also not rugging all of our existing node operators who were told, hey, you got to buy RPL. So we want to make sure we're providing value to them and not just giving it all to ETH only, and RPL has no fundamental value after that.
Great, Samus. Thank you for that. Val, I'm going to come back to you, and I want to say, will being a node operator be attractive enough on the new system? And how will we encourage people to switch from the legacy system to the new one?
So let me start with asking this question about the current system, what the market thinks about that. And the market has said no, it's not very attractive. That's why we have not gotten a whole lot more node operators in the last, not quite year. So for the new system, I think the answer is essentially yes, almost by definition. The structure is we're going to have a share that goes to node operators. And if we aren't attracting node operators, if that's a bottleneck, we pretty much have to increase it. If you don't increase it, you're saying, hey, I give up on Rocket Pool. We can't grow. Let's throw in the towel. So I think once you have the knob, you turn the knob. Anything else is suicide. So that means that while the system is running at all, node operators will find it attractive because that's what that number does. So I think the new system will be more rewarding than the legacy system in terms of migration. So that should be also getting people to switch. I'm not too worried about that happening.
Great, thank you for that. Samus, I want to come back to you, and I'm going to ask this question, right? So say kind of like Atlas, what happened after Atlas was, node operators were able to split their 8 ETH validators into 16 ETH validators into 8 ETH validators. And what ended up happening was there was a whole lot of node operators waiting for enough rETH deposits to happen for, people to put ETH into the system so their validators could be spun up. People were waiting, I think, 45 days at the peak of that. That's how long the wait was. What are we going to do about that? Like, if we go down to 4 ETH validators, that's like doubling the rETH requirement that we need pretty much. That could potentially take months and months. Hopefully not, of course, but it could, potentially take months and months for the rETH to come into the system to get those node operators working. What will we do about that? Like, is there something we can do for node operators and like for the queuing system? Like, what ideas do you have?
Right. So in the proposal, one of the ideas was an express queue. And so just introducing it generally, the idea of the express queue is it can move faster than the standard queue. So picture something like a TSA line. You have like a pre-check line, it moves faster. Maybe it's shorter. Maybe it also, they let more people through that line than a different standard kind of security checking. But the way it would work in practice is you have those two lanes. You have like a standard lane and an express lane, and you just alternate and take turns between those two. So on a standard queue, you get one deposit, and the express queue, you get two deposits. And so the point of that is we provide an avenue for a way to go through faster. And in order to enter that express queue, you have some tickets. So this would be given to new node operators, which really helps, especially smaller node operators. So we picture that, especially that base provision of, in the bond curves, you have the first two are 4 ETH bonds, and then after that, it'll be 1.5 ETH bonds. And if you're somebody who's new that's joining, you kind of think about like what is most valuable to Rocket Pool. Is it a new node operator joining, or is it just adding one more additional validator to an existing node operator? We probably value broadening our node operator set and being able to allow new participants to join. And so that's something that we can actually put a value to that by giving them a ticket to say, hey, you can go in the express queue if you want. You don't have to use this ticket. And then similarly, we look at our existing node operators. They are going to have to exit their individual fixed commission model and then opt into a mega pool, so kind of re-enter. And in that scenario, you have the option to use tickets if you want. So whichever queue might be faster for you. If everybody's in the express queue, it's not really helping you. But what it could do is help prevent situations where maybe you have a bunch of people, somebody lined up with a ton of ETH on day one, and they're just ready to go, Eth-only, it's an institution, and they just load up the queue, and then you have node operators who maybe were hesitant to migrate, they wanted to wait a little bit, and now they can use their tickets whenever they're ready, whenever they feel comfortable, and they can still enter in a faster way that they're not stuck waiting forever. And it's kind of like broadening everybody, getting a little bit of your node operators in versus whoever got there first gets all of them, and you're just stuck waiting, and you're like, I never want to enter this queue because it's going to take 2 weeks to ever even get a single validator through. So that's kind of the idea with the express queue, and it's kind of predictable that it's always going to advance. So if you're in one of them, even if it takes longer, you'll still be able to participate.
I like how you... Sorry, Val, go ahead.
The other thing I wanted to point out is with the idea of starting node operator share low and increasing it as we see that it's needed, that should really help a lot with having a 45-day queue. I would expect if we've correctly been too low, I would expect not much of a queue at all to start with, and then we'd kick it up, and then we might get a little queues form. But ideally, if we're kicking it up a small step at a time, we don't have this massive thing happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things I want to remind people about the queue dynamics as well was in Atlas, we had a new queue mechanism that was introduced where people who kind of joined the line, their ETH kind of feeds the people in front. Val, can you explain that? Do you remember that? And then that was like giving a boost to the rETH rewards, right? Like for a little while there, they were getting really juiced.
It does boost our ETH rewards, and actually, we end up we're doing it even stronger here, slightly. So what happened in Atlas is you had 1 ETH that would get staked to the beacon chain, and then the other 7 ETH of your ETH deposit would go to the deposit pool, and that could feed whoever's in the front of the queue. So it could complete a validator. Then when it was your turn, you would have a credit for those 7 ETH because you contributed them, and so you'd get full 31 ETH from the deposit pool to finish your validator. What that meant is if you had a very long line, if you had 100 people online, we had 7 ETH from each of them. We'd have 700 ETH that would get to be working instead of being idle. We talked earlier about how the deposit pool is idle ETH and reduces the APY of rETH. And this is the exact opposite. This is getting more ETH functional than rETH has put in. So yes, it juices the APY. That said, I don't think it's the efficient way to juice the APY. I think if you wanted to just do that, you could just increase the rETH share. Decrease NO share, increase rETH share. I think that's actually more efficient than getting a huge queue. But it is nice that if we do form a queue, insofar as that happens, it's as efficient as it can be. The thing that I mentioned, we'd be even more efficient is we're changing when the 1 ETH gets staked to the beacon chain. So actually, we'd have all the ETH from the depositors go to be available. So if it's an LEB4, all 4 ETH would go to the deposit pool, not just 3. So
Great, Val. Thanks for explaining that. And just to stick with you for one more second, if a solo staker has 32 ETH, they're like the Eth-only validators. They want to come in at Saturn 1 with the 4 ETH validators. So their one solo stake validator, which is 32 ETH, becomes 8 LEB4s. What kind of rewards do you think they could be looking at compared to their previous solo staking rewards?
Yeah, that's a great question. At LEB4s, well, importantly, and we've hit this theme multiple times, we don't know. The market will tell us. We have some starting points, but the market will let us know. We've even tried little surveys within the tokenomic nerds, and the guesses are pretty different. Off the cuff, I would guess maybe 1.5 to 2 times higher than solo APY. Am I right? We'll find out. Tune in next time. Yeah, but
it'll be more.
Yeah, it'll definitely be more.
Yeah.
That's actually the nice thing about Eth-only. It is guaranteed more, right? Like there's no, we'd have to set node operator commission to literally 0% in order for it to be exactly the same as solo Q. Even then, it's not worse, right? There's no case, because since there's no additional token, there's no fee, there's no possible way that it can be worse than running a solo validator. So it's only benefit.
And it just depends on how much better it'll be. Like that's what we'll find out.
Yep.
So when do you think we'll find that out? Do you think like the rates will be adjusted like within the first few months? Will it take longer?
Yeah.
Will it take less time? Like what kind of timeline do you think we'll know?
If we've correctly guessed low, and we will, like, I expect 2 weeks later we'd have seen the deposit pool be full the whole time, and we'd knock it up a notch, and we'd probably do that a few times. Sorry, yes, you're right. The queue, the deposit pool will be completely empty.
Yeah.
Wait, no, I think I said it right. The deposit queue will have ETH in it, meaning we're still supply blocked.
Oh,
right.
I thought you said if we set node operatorship too low, I see.
Then we'll still be supply blocked.
You're right.
Deposit pool will have ETH, and so we'll need to knock it up a notch. So yeah, we would, in concept, do that every 2 weeks until we have found some kind of balance in the marketplace. And this isn't an important thing here is also this isn't like a permanent balance. We're not trying to like find this point and then like stick a nail in it and we're like done. Lido might shake us up, and the market's stable point might shift. There might be other competitors. MEV might change, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of things that can move the needle, but I think we'll have the tools to follow the market where it goes.
Great, thank you for that, Val. We're going to move on to some RPL perspective questions now, and Samus, I'm going to start with you. So, in the current proposal, like, there's no RPL rewards to node operators, right? Like, that won't be a thing anymore. Why is that the case? And like, why was that path chosen?
Right. So it helps to look at why did it exist in the first place? And it was there because we had an RPL requirement where you had to bring RPL. And then in order to provide incentive to stay collateralized, otherwise it's just a one-time, you buy it, you never have to do anything again. There was an idea to pay them RPL yield, but it just comes from RPL inflation. So it's not really a revenue as much as it is transferring value from non-stakers to stakers. When you look at the new system, we have a new source of RPL value capture, and RPL is no longer a requirement to stake. So instead, you can choose to be ETH-only, you come and participate, or if you want to stake RPL, you're basically saying, hey, I'm going to speculate on it as much as I want to, and I'll be rewarded proportionally to that with ETH revenue. In terms of RPL inflation, especially as you zoom towards maturity, if you say, okay, things trend towards 100% RPL staked, at that point, you're not earning anything. It's just everybody's diluting themselves to pay themselves because it's the same party. But when you look at the new system, you're actually getting ETH revenue to RPL. So it's an actual source of yield versus just dilution and then being rewarded from that. Yeah. So why was that chosen? I think it simplifies things. We already have a way to pay node operators, and that's through the node operator share. We have a way to pay RPL stakers. That's through the voter share. So RPL inflation, now as we reduce it, there's also some narrative around that of, hey, it's more robust long-term value. You're not being diluted as much if you want to speculate, even as a non-staker.
Great, thank you. Val, I'm going to come back to you now. And, this idea of RPL staking not being a requirement anymore, like rings alarm bells in people's minds, like, oh no, like, if you don't need RPL anymore, like no one will want RPL anymore. Therefore, the price of RPL is going to go down fast. Like, what is your response to this way of thinking?
Yeah, I've seen that a lot, and it seems like there's this gut reaction that's like you're taking away the value capture, and we're replacing it with a new one. And I think that's the critical part. It's not remove value capture, it's swap value capture. So I definitely don't think this is hurting RPL. Otherwise, I doubt I would be working on it. I think what this is intending to do is it's intending to help make the protocol work smoothly. Right now, like I said a few times, we have been stagnant. We have suffered from our supply being blocked. So we need something that allows us to grow both past this blockage and past every blockage downstream. And if that's the case, and if we can expect that, then I think we can expect the protocol to do a lot better. And the new tokenomics, and frankly, the existing tokenomics also do this, but it's just less obvious because it's indirect. But the value of RPL is directly linked to the value of the protocol, to the amount that's locked in rETH, the amount of ETH in the system. Because again, there's only one source of revenue total in the whole system, which is what do validators produce. So if we increase that number, there is more to go around, and the part that doesn't go to NOs and to rETH holders goes to RPL. And that's true, again, both under the current tokenomics indirectly and much more directly in the new tokenomics. Obviously, there's a different question, which is what's the price going to do, not as opposed to a fundamental value question. And I don't know. It's crypto. If you tell me the value decides to go crazy high up, that's entirely possible. If it crashes for no reason, that's also possible. I hope it simplifying the linkage can make it a little bit more stable. But we'll see.
Great, thank you for that, Val. And I'm going to come back to you, Samus. You were saying that the 5% inflation is going to go away, but there's still going to be like a 1.5% inflation, right? Like, what's the purpose of that inflation? What's going to happen with the RPL that is minted there?
Right, essentially no change. So right now it's before Saturn, it's 5% inflation total, and 70% of that, which would be 3.5%, goes to node operators as RPL staking rewards. And the other 1.5% goes to the DAO. So you have the ODAO and then the PDAO and the treasury. And most recently it's shifted towards pretty much all the PDAO. There's still a little bit going to the ODAO, but essentially no change to that. We're just going to keep it simple this time. But maybe in the future that'll change.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Val, I want to come back to you and I want to ask you a question about the RPL collateral. So instead of removing the RPL collateral altogether, why don't we just reduce it and make it a smaller amount? Like instead of 10% borrowed ETH, we could set the minimum at 1% borrowed ETH or 0.5% borrowed ETH. Wouldn't that grow the TVL of the protocol too? Wouldn't that really help Rocket Pool grow?
Yeah. So I saw this question get posted live to the Discord, and I think so. If we in the current tokenomics and we reduce that requirement by 20x, that's a 20x hit to the fundamental value of RPL. take that to heart. So, I'll view it alternatively. I think that question said, hey, if it grows so much, couldn't that make RPL more valuable? It's like RPL, it would have to grow 20x our current size to be not worse, which would be, a 40 odd percent market share, bigger than Lido. So yeah, in terms of just the magnitude, I didn't think that's a bad move. That said, I do think there is some reality here. If we treated the RPL requirement as a variable, we could totally get node operators interested. There is a problem here because it's kind of it's a permanent thing. So similar to the commission issue that Samus talked about earlier, where hey, once you start a validator, it's a 14% validator forever, and that's it. Or 20% or whatever it is. We'd have the same issue here, right? If you started your validator when the requirement was 1%, and then later we changed it to 5%, you're still running. So we just have we'd have a lot less RPL locked than we want, and the value of RPL would be less. Interestingly, it doesn't go the other way, right? If I'm at if I'm at 10% and I reduce it to 1%, guess what? All the existing node operators have an incentive to exit and re-enter at the lower requirement. So it's kind of this one way it can only lose value for RPL situation. So I think it's kind of strictly worse than having a share go to RPL because of that inflexibility. But again, I do want to call out. I think there is some truth to that. There is some ability to, hey, if we just reduce this, does it give us a temporary relief? I think it does. And I've talked about it as a potential stepping stone move. Once if we passed tokenomics rework, could we consider doing something like that in the meantime? So because that's actually a setting change. So we could do that without contract upgrades. And that might make sense to me, but really I haven't thought about it that much, and I'll think about it more after the tokenomics stuff is in the books.
Yeah, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, so either one of you guys can, a little bit more later, but either one of you guys can answer it. But I think you might have seen this idea of a protocol called Rocket Lend to come up, like that was kind of coming up through the community,
Yep.
And a couple of other people have talked about this idea of there being some kind of like pool where you can get RPL from. Would that not work instead of these tokenomics changes as well, where there's like a borrowing pool available where you can just go and get RPL and stake it, and then everyone just gets their rewards the way it is?
So no. At the end of the day, that can change if different people find aspects attractive, but it can't fix nobody finds the overall, like if there's a certain amount of pie that is going to RPL and a certain amount of pie that's going to node operators, and right now it's enmeshed. But if there's not enough pie, there's just not enough pie. So like that's it. And right now we could change that parameter and then get that ratchet effect that I mentioned, where it can only destroy RPL value. So I think to first order, a lending market can do what it can do is it can make the best version of what we have. It can help make matches. If there are lots of speculators, it can help create some value out of it. But it can't make something that the market overall finds unattractive. It can't make it attractive. So I think it can only help to a limited degree.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Samus.
Yeah, I think two things that maybe this was skipping ahead a little bit, but two overall things that are related to that. I think lending, if it's perfectly efficient, there's not really any new value capture. So you say, okay, I've got the Rocket Pool team that already has a bunch of RPL. They already own it. Now I'm going to lend it to an institution who's bringing only ETH. Now there was no new RPL buy pressure that happened. It was only existing holders that can more efficiently match with somebody who's ETH-only. So you still allowed ETH-only, but it was only to institutions or being able to match make in that way. So it helps there. It's more efficient, but I'm not sure we get any buy pressure from that. But then second, I think it's flawed, especially as soon as you compare to competitors. So there's the idea of, okay, we can create value by making it an entry ticket. That was kind of the original idea for the RPL requirement. And if we try to hold on to that requirement and say, let's bring value by forcing a ticket, what happens if you have somewhere else that doesn't force the ticket that provides just as much value or more? Well, now you just lose participants and they go elsewhere. And so the value of that ticket that you're saying, hey, I'm going to give this requirement, like, come buy my ticket and then you can participate. It's not worth anything if you can just avoid the ticket altogether. So if we did have a monopoly on the market, then sure, we could come up with some kind of, I mean, we could charge as much as we want, right? But we don't have a monopoly, so we have to be competitive.
Even then, why not charge it that way, right? Why not just have a lower NO share? I think
Yeah.
essentially a ticket or requirement reduces your ROI, so it's just kind of a node fee. So if you have positive node share and negative node fee, it's the same as having just a lower node share, or very similar anyways.
Yeah, and I think it's also a huge part of that is it's less predictable, both for the participant, the node operator, and for the protocol, because maybe I buy at the market top right after Atlas, and I bought that requirement, I bought my ticket, and then it was actually 6 times cheaper or more expensive than it could have been if I just waited 6 months later instead of just a continuous stream of your revenue. So yeah, I think it's less predictable. That adds kind of, at least to people getting burnt potentially as well.
It entangles the speculator role for force.
Excellent, great. So we're going to move on to the next section now. These are some technical questions that might need to be, like, people have about the technicals of, the tokenomics change. So either of you can answer this first one. Is like, what outside actions need to happen to make the tokenomics changes possible?
Yeah,
I think Samus,
pretty
you can
broad.
take it. Yeah.
Sure. The Valdorf already mentioned. Okay, you could say, what about Ethereum? So we're waiting on Pectra for forced exits. There's also generally max EB, which that's its own topic of will we use that for megapools or not? It seems like probably not if we want to go live this year, like Lido is, and then Pectra with max EB doesn't come till much later. But so I think Saturn 1, we don't necessarily need to wait for any Ethereum upgrades. Outside help, outside actions. I don't know if the team counts as outside, but I think we need to be able to decide what scope is possible to implement. How do we kind of work together to make realistic change? I think we are asking for help reviewing the specs and getting them workable to go to a vote. But I don't know that there's any outside actions. Yeah, those are the two things. I don't know about it. Yeah.
For Saturn 2, we do have our needs. For Saturn 1, there shouldn't be an outside.
Cool. Well, I'm going to stick with you for the next question. One of the things that's mentioned in the tokenomics is this idea of there being anti-sock puppet effects. Now, what are sock puppets, and how does the new tokenomics help against sock puppets?
Yeah. Okay. So this is actually an effect I've been really excited about since we started thinking about bond curves, even not seriously. So more than a year ago, we've tossed out the idea of bond curves. So in Rocket Pool, vote power is quadratic, right? So that means if you put all of your if you have one node with 100 mini pools, you have less vote power than if you have 10 nodes with 10 mini pools each. That's not great, right? That creates an incentive to make these sock puppet nodes that you control 10 of them and more vote power. Not great. So the cool thing about the bond curve is since you make 2 4 ETH ones, and then you can make an indefinite number of 1.5 ETH ones, the 1.5 ETH validators essentially give you better APY. So what that means is you're actually incentivized, like literally monetarily incentivized, to have all your nodes, all your mini pools on one node, or all your validators on one node, which lines up perfectly with the intent of this quadratic vote power. And it may still be that that whales want to split at some point for operational reasons. Maybe you want to say, 300, that's enough, I'm going to split. But at least it doesn't get to the ridiculous place.
And like you said about whales, right? Like, if you've got more than 100 validators, for example, those first 2, they're not going to make that much of a difference, right? But it's just for the majority of people, it will still make a difference.
Yeah, so it might not, right. So the difference in profits from a 100 mini pool nodes versus 200 mini pool node, it's going to be pretty small. But it prevents the extremes. If this person has 200 and they decide they're going to go to 100 mini pool nodes, they'll lose out on a massive amount of money, and
Yep.
they'll have a very real cost to trying to game the vote powers. So that's good.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, one of the things that we're going to add is this idea of MEV theft prevention. Val, can you tell us a little bit about how that might work under new tokenomics?
So technically, we already have the ability to penalize validators, mini pools, for anything, MEV theft being one of those things. We haven't used it. What we have done is we've looked for what theft has occurred or hasn't occurred. And importantly, this is really critical because it changes how important this problem is. Importantly, we didn't see it be a big problem. We saw it be a very negligible problem. In fact, I would say there's no evidence that someone's stealing on purpose. There's definitely evidence that things have been set up wrong here and there. But it doesn't amount to a significant loss to rETH. So, the urgency of this, from what I've seen, is quite low. We did Ramana and I did a report on it. I think there's an update that's going to be coming out that they're working on with Art Democrat. So that will be interesting to see if anything changes. Hopefully, no. I think in general, MEV theft is going to need some kind of supervision. There's a couple of ideas for how to supervise it better, with some kind of neutral relay that just shows locally built blocks from multiple points of view, for example, or by disallowing locally built blocks entirely, or the most heavy-handed thing, which would be having a negative commission that goes to node operators, and then they just get to keep the MEV. But that's actually really painful for small operators because their expected income is negative. But yeah, so I think there's real work that needs to get done there. What we've seen so far is that it's not urgent work. It's not actually happening yet. We need to have the ability to penalize it, and we need to be vigilant. But if you tell me this isn't getting attention for Saturn 1, I don't think. I think not get attention for Saturn 1. Yes, the ability to penalize it. So it's just like they have a tool, but we not necessarily have a lot of way to tell them when to use the tool. I think that's going to be mostly okay until we see it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So under new tokenomics, there's the surplus share of the commission that's going to go towards capturing value for RPL. So far, we have 3 different proposals. We haven't decided on which one we as a community will take. There's the use the ETH to buy RPL and burn that. Use the ETH to buy RPL and to provide liquidity in a rETH RPL pool, and then use the ETH to just give it to node operators who stake with RPL, like the increase in the voter share, basically, to cover the whole amount. Are there any other ways that people have thought of capturing value for RPL? And if so, why haven't those been researched more thoroughly?
I don't think there's any major ideas that I've seen or heard or talked about. In terms of one of the cool things is we can always do it in the future. So about making this vote happen in Saturn before Saturn 2, we could have this pot of surplus revenue where we're waiting to see, okay, do we want to distribute it to voter share, by burn, or LP? But I think this is also cool because with the universal adjustable revenue share splits, you could after Saturn, if we want to come back to this, if we wanted to say we do need voter share no matter what, let's start with just those two, voter share and node operator commission, get those settled. And then if we wanted to figure out, okay, a surplus mechanism later, we could always do that. But yeah, I think it's the DAO is kind of split in terms of the vibe check we did. We're just checking between those three in terms of what would be the preference. But I think we still need to talk about that, model those things out. But I haven't heard any other major ideas. I don't know if anybody else has.
I think the other thing that we're hoping to hear back on is some opinions from legal counsel about if there's a benefit to one of those systems or a disadvantage to one of those systems that would swing the DAO's opinion. To my point of view, I like the LP most, and I like Burn second most, and I like voter share third most. But honestly, it's not a strong preference, right? Like this is like, yes, I like it better. So yeah.
Thanks for that. I have a question about the team and how that kind of fits into everything. So this, of course, is a proposal that's being driven by the community, by the PDAO. And has the team given feedback on this? Where does the team stand on this? And are there any differences in the perspective of the team and the community with this tokenomics rework?
What we've heard so far has been maybe I would say cautious optimism. It's like don't hear any concerns. I think there's an outstanding checking with legal counsel that we're waiting on, like Val said, but nothing seems concerning off the get-go. I think it kind of, you look around between those examples, we're already giving revenue in some capacity to RPL through voter share type of way, where we've got, okay, you have to bring RPL and stake it, and then you're getting RPL rewards. And then you look at buy and burn, it's like there's other tokens that have done this, and they're treated by at least institutions like Coinbase. You can say, okay, Maker, that token has a burn and it's tradable on Coinbase. So I would think that team has done due diligence on Coinbase's side legally to vet it. Buy an LP, I don't know if there's any other examples and how that's been treated, but I don't know. I think that's, broad SEC. It's kind of arbitrary. And then it's like, okay, well, am I doing anything more than anybody else? I don't know. And then obviously there's legal advice that they can give specifically, but we'll see.
It's also worth noting, like, it's not like we have like huge legal blessing on like what the current system is either. So I don't want to make it sound like, oh yeah, these three opinions, these three options may be legally questionable, but what we have right now is perfect. I think it's everything is in fog of war.
In crypto, yeah.
We're trying to do our best. But that includes the status quo. So there's no, yeah, we are guaranteed 100% sure.
Okay.
Hitting the other part of your question, Whack. Core dev team has given feedback a couple times. I think it's quite positive. To be honest, they have, an issue here, an issue there, but honestly, every person that has contributed to the tokenomics has things they don't like, and if that wasn't the case, it'd be kind of surprising.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so let's get to some Ethereum level questions now. So we know that Ethereum is not an ossified project. There's changes happening at the Ethereum level. Rocket Pool kind of has to adjust to those changes and live within those changes. One of the things is that is being researched is changing how the staking rewards work, right? And there's a few different ideas of this and trying to cap the validator set and all these different kind of things. So the next hard fork likely won't include any of these changes, but the one after that, the Osaka and F star likely will. How will the planned tokenomics live in that world? Have you guys thought about that? Or is this something that's going to have to be addressed again later? What are your thoughts on this?
I'll give that a go. So in general, when we talk about this proposal, we often say a multiplier of solo APY as the income. So in that respect, we're kind of it doesn't matter what the staking fee, what the staking income is, as long as there is staking income. As long as if solo staking is attractive, rocket pool staking should be more attractive. If at some point it gets to, hey, the only way you can make money is if you run your own searcher, yes, that would be a problem for us, like all home stakers. But I don't really think something we can really address, and I hope it doesn't ever get there. But yeah, I think as long as solo staking's okay, we're just a multiplier on top of that, so we should be fine.
I think it's kind of a core fundamental reason of how Ethereum has designed things. There's trade-offs you make in the system, and Ethereum, as being able to allow home stakers to participate and have financial incentive to do so, has been its philosophy from day one. So until that day changes, I think Rocket Pool will always be viable and even better than solo staking in some ways. Yeah.
That makes sense. This is a kind of a thought experiment question, I guess, but there's this idea, right, that 32 ETH is needed to stake, and to attack Ethereum network, you need to have 33% of the stake to prevent finality, and you have to have 66% of the stake to really mess things up and cause chain forks and stuff. And that requirement of having that much ETH is so difficult because you need so much of it. With Rocket Pool, however, if we only need 1.5 ETH to make a validator instead of 32 ETH to make a validator, won't that make executing those kinds of attacks on Ethereum that much more possible?
Yes. Flat right? It's a 20x easier attack, but that's not the easiest attack by a long shot, right? So if you can corrupt Lido governance, you get 30%. If you can corrupt, the CEO of Coinbase, you get 13% flat out, right? So it's I think a 20x improvement is not the biggest danger, right? If you think about what it would take to bribe a company or a small set of individuals, someone that runs a lot of nodes on behalf of Kiln, something like that, right? I think those costs are dramatically lower than putting in 1.5 ETH for each single validator. Yes, it would be a bad thing if the whole world was solo validators, but it's not. And given that it's not, it's better than the average context we have right now. So it's actually increasing security. One thing that I actually believe that's very disputable is I actually believe that if you have 32 ETH and you put it all into Rocket Pool, I believe it contributes more to security than if you just make one solo validator. And that's because you'll get more votes. And if you are one of the good ones, that's worth something. So yes, it's an attack, or it's a benefit. It's just a force multiplier. It's kind of agnostic to purpose.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We have a lot of
also, one of the things to remember as well is that Rocket Pool voted to self-limit. So as we approach that self-limit threshold, then there'll be disincentives to grow more than that. Either the protocol will lock things down, or we'll start changing rewards, tweaking them so it just doesn't grow more than that. So yeah, exactly. So that's cool. Val, I know that you are an all nodes node operator. I'm sorry if that's doxing you. Do you know how all nodes is going to use these new validators? Will they be ready for LEB4s? Will they be ready for LEB 1.5s? Do you know anything about that? And do you know how that might work for fees?
No, I know nothing. But what I can say is they were quite reasonable about LEB8s. I'm not sure what it would look like here, but I suspect that they would try to be reasonable. I suspect that the overall cost per invested ETH would go up, but not scale. But it wouldn't scale with number of validators it did for LEB8s. I wouldn't expect it to here either. But I don't have any any information here about what it would actually look like. So we will see.
Yep.
Actually, on that point though, hopefully we'll have Vroon, the competitor that the GMC is funding, and I think the GMC is funding actually 2 competitors.
Hmm.
So hopefully we'll have competition in the space to also prevent that from being too much of a problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. And another thing to remember as well is people who have a certain number of validators, it might be easier for them to actually just rent like server
Absolutely.
space, and eventually the cost benefit analysis might change to the point where they can get learning about how to
Yeah.
run their smart node on the server. Yeah, that'd be really interesting
Maybe
to
we
see.
can get off. Maybe we can get Val off all nodes someday and get him to run his.
A Val with his million validators.
Million validators, is that what I have? All right.
How many do you have now?
3.
Oh, okay, that's more than me. Okay, so let's actually change the topic for a second, and we're going to be talking about other competing tokenomics ideas. So, Samus, you did a really good job of kind of like summing up how we got to this point by saying, we started a discussion in response to Lido CSM, and then the community went into overdrive, and we had, the incubator, and then that kind of a cohesive plan and stuff that came along. One of the things that we were asking for like the whole time was like, please give ideas, we need more ideas, we need competing ideas. We didn't get any for quite a long time. Then we got one from NodeSet, and just a few weeks ago we got one from 1KX, who are a large node operator with Rocket Pool. Can you tell us like really briefly like what their ideas are, and what's the difference between the ideas that you guys have brought to the community, that the community has worked on together, and these 2 different groups?
Right. I think the core with NodeSet, and then to a lesser degree 1KX, would be trying to keep things the same in terms of the core tokenomics, but allow Houston to enable basically lending or delegation to solve the same type of problem. And yeah, I think generally there's challenges that I don't think Houston solves, and we kind of talked about some of them before. I think it's really helpful to steelman some of the proposals, say, okay, let's think about a different perspective, and is there, why is this a better solution or not? So I think it's really helpful to have feedback and to kind of filter through and say what makes sense, what doesn't, and let the community decide. But ultimately, yeah, 1KX, their recent one, I think my understanding of it is let's allow delegation. I think they even said something like a Tinder, like the dating app, but for marriages in protocol, saying like, okay, let's try to match RPL holders who want to speculate with people who don't want to speculate, like Eth-only. And I think all of these things can be built on top of Saturn and even on top of Rocket Pool, but I don't think it has to make it into the core protocol, and specifically by forcing an RPL requirement. I think you can come up with the dashboard, you can come up with the Tinder app, and then you can do all that for voter share rewards and permissionlessly matching RPL stakers with ETH node operators who have the ability to have that space on their node if they wanted to do that. But I think as soon as you create that requirement, you potentially lose value from participants going elsewhere where there's not that requirement. And I don't think there's any new value capture or added value capture from putting a barrier in front of people. So I think Houston helps basically reduce friction, and we can add more efficiency, but even in that, you maybe lose some of the buy pressure because, okay, instead of going to buy it, I find somebody else who already has it to lend it to me. So anyways, those are a couple high level things I would say, but yeah.
Val, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. NodeSet didn't make a proposal. They critiqued the existing proposal. And they noted some things that they could see. They also made a model of how things could work under proposed tokenomics, assuming that TVL growth happened. However, if we assume TVL growth happens, like that's the whole point of tokenomics changes, is to enable it. So yeah, if you assume the outcome, it dramatically changes the benefit of working for that outcome, because then you just don't have to, you've assumed it. One bit that I feel was in there, they talk about reducing the required collateral, and they just talk about it saying, hey, this would only be near term. They also don't use that value in their model in table 2. Yeah, so it's like, I don't know. Yeah, they assume that there's this change. They assume it'll go away for no explained reason, and they assume that the TVL growth will happen even without the change that they say is needed to get there. So I don't really I appreciate the feedback. I think there's useful feedback in there, but I don't really view it as a proposal per se. Maybe with a good bit of more work, it could have become a proposal, but I don't think it was one. I don't think it tried to solve the existing problems. Yeah, for on the 1KX side, I think they did try a lot harder to get to a proposal. I don't think it addresses all the issues that we brought up. So if you look at the explainer, there's like again 5 issues we highlight. I think they end up addressing like 2 of them, but not the others. So I don't think it's there. I have this regret. I really wish 1KX had been with us in February. I would have loved to have that voice with us all along and build with them. But I think where we are right now, it's their proposal is not in a mature place, and so it's a little unfair, right? They've had 3 weeks to work on it, so it's not in a mature place. So it's not something that would function. But yeah, I really wish they'd been with us earlier because I've loved having the voice. Honestly, it's very different.
Cool. Thank you for answering that. The next section is a section about timing and like possibilities. So the first question in this section, either of you can answer, is what is the probability that your tokenomics will become the tokenomics of the protocol, like in the foreseeable future?
100%. I don't know.
300%.
Yeah, 300. I think the feedback seems positive. I mean, we've asked for feedback on the forum. There's spaces to say, do you support it? Yes or no. And it's overwhelmingly positive. And I think there's some dissenting voices, and that's helpful to have opposite perspectives and feedback, but it doesn't seem to be anything close to a majority that would prevent it from going through. So
we need to see a surprise whale coalition or maybe a new sticking point, like, oh, actually we believe this particular point is broken and delegates coming out against that or something like that. It would be a little out of left field right now, but it's possible, of course.
And so we'd love to hear if there is something like that. We'd love to hear it now.
Please bring it up if you see that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so then the next question is when do we get a vote on the tokenomics? So we're recording now on June 30th, July 1st. Kind of the episode will go out July 1st. Yeah. When will we vote on your plan?
So we put a soft deadline of July 1st for feedback if you have any for the specs and just wide proposal, because I think to have something concrete, and then July 8th for sentiment vote. I think some of that is bottlenecked by is it vote ready, and that a critical part of that is working with the team to say the scope, is it implementation details, but yeah.
The sentiment check doesn't need to be on the exact final text, but we don't want it to be on something radically different from the final text either. So we'll see where we get. Like Sam said, we were hoping that would be around July 8th. It'll depend a little bit on bandwidth for the contributors and on if we can. There's I think like 1.5 things from the team that could be considered sticking points. So if we can get those resolved well enough that we're like, okay, we're not stuck. So if we can get there, and we can get again the tokenomic nerd contribution to get some. We have we work together on what the RPIPs look like, and so we have a little bit of a backlog of things that need to get done still. So if those things get finished, that's when it'll go live.
Excellent. Okay,
see.
and then what do you think happens after the voting? Then say the voting happens and it's approved. What will the implementation look like? And is it possible that it will launch by the end of this year, which is when we think Lido CSM goes live? And that's for Saturn one. Like,
Mhm.
I know Samus, you're a bit more hopeful than Val, but maybe you can both answer this question.
Yeah, I'm excited to have the vote passed, and then we can just say when to Kane and let him tell us. But I think just wild guess is it's probably a year away or 9 months.
For
I don't know,
Saturn,
for
for
Saturn
Saturn 1?
1. I think just look at how long did Houston take and the scope of Houston with audits and everything, development. Yeah, that's just my wild guess, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think uh, I think Q1 2025 would be like the realistic optimistic. There is a optimistic everything goes smooth that is this year. I think that doesn't. And yeah, I think I will like to pass the buck to say, hey, ask Langers. If you ask Kane and if you ask Langers, I'm sure you'll also get different answers. By the way,
Yeah.
it's a pretty standard engineer will give you a nicer schedule sort of
Yeah.
thing. So I think that does apply here.
That makes
Yeah, I
sense.
was channeling my pragmatist when I said that, but optimistically, I would love it to be sooner, but I don't know. Yeah,
Samus
we'll
has
see.
it coming out end of July.
Yeah.
It's
1
really
month.
early. Yeah. I know this is outside like your wheelhouse, but do you have any ideas of when Pectra will be here and then Saturn 2 with that?
Yeah. No.
I think the latest is they claimed Q1 of 2025, which I hear Q1 of 2025, and I think Q2 of 2025,
Hmm.
Q3 maybe. So
I've heard
we'll
generally it's supposed to be a massive, like the most changes in one proposal, or in one
yeah,
upgrade so far.
it is huge,
So
Yeah.
we'll see, and it keeps growing.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's been locked yet. Yeah, so that's rough. We'll see where it is.
Okay. And one final question is about like Rocket Pool acting in like relation to competitors. We've seen ETHify come online, we've seen Puffer, and all of these guys are going to be giving permissionless staking available as well. Lido CSM soon. Are we worried at all about competitors getting to these kind of places before we are? How do you all feel about that?
Yeah, I think general concern if Lido is live by this end of year, it's kind of the fire's burning for us to get something out. But I think also if you know something's coming in terms of like our node operators know the change is right around the corner, I doubt they would want to jump ship and go through the hassle of setting up and then to try to come back or something. But yeah, I think there's some wiggle room there. But I think generally Rocket Pool, it's a community-led, like decentralized governance process, so that's slower. But I think it's going to be more robust that way.
Val, do you
Yeah.
have anything to add to that?
What's funny is we actually get the velocity question both ways.
That's true.
There are a fair number of folks, 1KX and the node set folks being part of this set where they're like, hey, we just did this Houston thing. We should sit on it for 6 months, get data, and then think about our next step. And there's definitely a lot of other people who are on the EtherFi, CSM, etc. They're breathing down our necks. We cannot sit on our laurels and do anything less than what we think is best.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely in that camp. I definitely have much more often been frustrated that we don't act than that we act too fast. So yeah, there have been some discussions. I think there's been this strategy committee concept floated around that some people think would make things more efficient. There's also been some more specific hey, we should document blank better to help onboard people. I think we've talked about how the research incubator was ridiculously successful, and we should do more things like that. I mean, honestly, getting Samus
on board as a contributor has been like a big deal. Like it, you know, I work on this a lot, and I've been on the edge of burnout repeatedly. And if Samus wasn't around to take some of that load, it would be slower. Let's
Yeah.
go with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think getting more people onboarded one way or another, if we can figure that out, it would be hugely beneficial for Rocket Pool and its ability to be nimble and to think about new angles and so forth.
Wonderful. Okay, well, that wraps up most of the questions, well, all the questions I gathered from the community who wanted these answered. Of course, this wasn't an explainer of the tokenomics. This was answering these great questions, and you both did a wonderful job with that. I just want to add that I am so incredibly grateful that you are both part of the Rocket Pool community, and your contributions in this have been absolutely monumental. So a huge thanks goes out from me, and I'm sure everyone who's watching this right now, to both of you. So really thank you guys, both of you, and I'm sure that there's going to be really good stuff that comes from this. And I like to say that there's very few like billion-dollar corporations, companies, entities out there that like random like anons like Val, like no one knows who you are, right? Like who can steer these things. And I think it's so rewarding when we really reward hard work and dedication and like genius ideas, and you guys have both brought a lot of those to Rocket Pool and to our community. So thank you so much to both of you for that. On that note, we're going to end this episode. So thank you all for watching, listening, asking questions. Thank you so much for providing the questions. And we've got another couple of tokenomics things coming very soon. So definitely keep your eyes open for those. But thanks to Val and Samus.
Cheers. Thanks.